What if I told you we have already lived through this moment before? Not as a metaphor, not as poetic exaggeration, but literally, that flourishing civilizations, with advanced science, with architecture that still shames us today, with systems of writing and astronomy and engineering, destroyed themselves, not through invasions, not through meteors, but from within, through the greed of those who had more and wanted everything, through the ego of those who built empires and forgot that empires have an expiration date, through the lack of humility of generations who believed they were the exception. Do you feel resistance when you hear this? Good. The resistance you feel is exactly the mechanism that has been destroying us for millennia. Let me tell you a story that is not fiction, because the character you're about to meet already existed, with other names, in other languages, in other eras, but always with the same soul. Call him Kale, but you could call him any name. You could call him humanity. Kale was born in a village leaning against a slow-moving river in the heart of a fertile plain that his ancestors simply called the gift. It was a gift because the land gave without asking, because the river flowed without charging, because the seasons taught without demanding that anyone take notes. Kale's father was a man of few words and many hands, a builder. And Kale's grandmother was the guardian of something modern civilizations no longer even know they have lost. Long memory. The memory that does not fit within a single life. The memory that passes through generations the way a root passes through stone. One day when Kale was perhaps 10 years old, his grandmother called him to sit by the fire. And she told him something he did not immediately understand. Like all important truths, they arrive before we are capable of bearing them. Kyle, before us there were others, as capable as we are, perhaps more. They built things we cannot reproduce, and they disappeared. Do not ask why, ask how, because the how is something you can change. The why is always the same. Kyle listened. He smiled and went out to play. He was only a boy, and the warnings of the old always seem exaggerated until the moment they stop being so. The years passed. Kyle grew up, and he grew quickly, in the way ambitious men grow, skipping steps, always looking upward, never to the sides, never behind. Kyle became a builder like his father, but where his father built houses, Kyle wanted to build cities. Where his father planted trees for his children, Kyle cut down forests for the present. Where his father asked the land for permission, Kyle took from the land what he believed belonged to him by right of intelligence. And the most dangerous thing of all, he was right. The cities grew. The harvests increased. The people had more. The numbers were real. Progress was visible. And when progress is visible, the destruction that lies beneath it becomes invisible, because eyes see what they want to see, and the ego decides what the eyes want. There was something Kale did not know how to measure. The sound the river made when it began to slow, the silence of the birds that left without saying goodbye. The different color of the soil after the 10th consecutive harvest without rest. There were signs. There are always signs. The archaeologists who today excavate the ruins of extinct civilizations find the same patterns repeated with a chilling consistency. Accelerated deforestation, exhausted soils, extreme social stratification between those who had and those who served, ever larger monuments built with ever scarcer resources. As if, before dying, empires felt the need to shout their greatness louder, as if the size of the monument were inversely proportional to the awareness of the abyss approaching. Kyle built his greatest monument when the river was already barely flowing. There is something extraordinary that modern archaeologists found in the ruins of the Indus Valley civilization, one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the world, which flourished more than 4,000 years ago and then almost completely disappeared. They found cities with sanitation systems more sophisticated than those of Rome centuries later. Streets planned in a grid, standardized weights and measures, long-distance trade, architecture that assumed collective planning and long-term vision. And then, silence. In just a few centuries, cities of 100,000 people turned to dust. Researchers still debate the exact causes, but a growing consensus has emerged. The combination of environmental exploitation, the collapse of water systems, and above all, the inability of elites to change course even when the signs were clear. It was not nature that destroyed them. It was the refusal to listen to nature when it still had a voice. And this is not an exception. It is a pattern. The Maya civilization cleared its forests to expand agriculture. The soils were exhausted. Rainfall patterns changed. Wars between city-states multiplied because of scarcity. The elites continued building larger temples and fighting bloodier wars while the system collapsed from within. The stones remained. The people disappeared. Rome exported its crisis to the frontiers until the frontiers themselves ceased to exist. The Angkor Empire in Cambodia built one of the most impressive irrigation systems of the ancient world, and then overloaded it until it collapsed, while the aristocratic elite refused to reform a system that served them well, even as it was killing everyone else. Kyle knew none of this, but if he had, would it have mattered? That is the question that should keep us awake at night. Kyle's grandmother was very old when he became the most powerful man in the region. His warehouses were full. His workers were many. His name was spoken with a mixture of admiration and fear, which is how empires like to be spoken of. She went to visit him. She walked bent over a dark wooden cane, polished by time. Her eyes, however, were still young, the kind of eyes that have seen things most people refuse to look at. Kyle received her in his hall. He showed her the maps of the lands he controlled, the plans for the next project, the projections for growth. His grandmother listened patiently, and then she said only this: Kyle, every civilization that believed it was the exception was exactly like those that came before. Greatness did not make you different. It made you the same and more blind, because the taller the building, the harder it is to see the foundation giving way. Kyle smiled, the condescending smile of those who confuse experience with knowledge and knowledge with power. Grandmother exaggerates, he said. These are different times. We have tools the ancients did not have. You do, she replied, and you use them faster, and you destroy faster, and you build faster, and you need more, faster still. Speed is not a virtue, Kyle. It is simply greed with a good reputation. Kyle did not answer. There was something in those words that touched a place his success had never managed to reach. But touching is not enough. Sometimes the world needs to strike us hard before we hear what gentle words could not say. The world was about to strike. Collapse did not come all at once. It never does. Collapses are processes, not events. They are silent accumulations of ignored consequences that one day reach a critical mass and make it seem as if everything happened suddenly, when in truth it took decades, sometimes centuries, to happen slowly. First, the harvests began to shrink. The soils were exhausted, the rivers weaker. Kyle responded with more labor, more land, more hands. He responded with expansion, which is how empires respond to every problem, because expansion is the only verb they know. Then came the conflicts, because scarcity is the most fertile ground for war. not the declared war of armies. That is only the surface. The real war was more subtle, the war between those with full warehouses and those with hungry children. The war between an ego that cannot admit error and a reality that insists on showing it. Archaeologists find this war in the bones. In the skeletons of extinct civilizations, there are clear signs of malnutrition among the lower classes while the elites continued to eat well. The desert always begins by settling on someone else's plate. Kyle was 60 when he understood. Not suddenly. True awareness is rarely a lightning strike. It is more like dawn, slow, inevitable, and sometimes so gradual that you only realize it has arrived when it is already day. He stood alone in a field that had been forest when he was a child. Now it was dry earth, burned, cracked. There was an old stone nearby, part of a structure from an even older civilization than his own, one no one knew how to name anymore. A civilization that had also been great, that had also had its Kyles. And now, it was only stone. Kyle placed his hand on the stone. He felt its cold. He felt the time within it. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear. Not of the future, of the mirror. There is a difference between knowing and changing, between recognizing and acting. And that difference is exactly the precipice upon which humanity has danced throughout its entire history. Kyle stayed in the dry earth for a long time. When he stood up, his hands were covered with soil. He gave no speech. He called no assembly. He promised nothing to anyone. He took from his pocket a seed he had found on the ground near his feet, a small, hard seed that seemed impossible to contain anything alive. He dug into the dry earth with his fingers, placed the seed, covered it. He knew it would probably not survive. He knew that even if it did, he would never see the tree. He knew that his empire was already giving way from within, and that one seed would not save it. But there was something about that gesture that was different from everything he had done before. It was a gesture without ego, without return, without an audience, a gesture that existed for no one except the future, which might not even remember his name. It was the first truly humble gesture of his life, and it was the most powerful gesture he ever made. We are now living in a moment that the historians of the future will study with the same mixture of astonishment and sadness with which we study the Maya collapse, the disappearance of the Indus civilization, and the fall of Rome. They will find the same patterns, the same deforestation, the same stratification, the same growing monuments built while the foundations were giving way, the same collective ego that confused growth with health, accumulation with wealth, speed with wisdom. And they will find one difference, only one, compared with all previous civilizations. We know, for the first time in history, a civilization possesses knowledge of all previous collapses, has the scientific tools to measure the damage in real time, and has the technical capacity to change course. The question is not whether we can. The question is whether we want to, whether we have enough humility to say our ego is killing us. Our greed is not progress. It is the same mechanism that has already destroyed entire civilizations, and this time there is no other continent where we can start again. We are the first generation with enough awareness to break the cycle, and if we do not do it, we will also be the last with the opportunity to try. Kyle's legacy was not his empire. The empire disappeared, as all empires disappear. Kyle's legacy was the seed he planted without knowing whether it would grow, the gesture without ego, the late humility that arrived in time to plant something, even if not in time to change everything. What do we plant? Not as a civilization, that question is too large to be answered all at once, but as individuals. As people who woke up today opened their eyes and were given the chance to choose a different gesture, history does not repeat, it rhymes. And we know the rhymes well enough to be able, for the first time, to choose a different verse. If this parable touched you somewhere that everyday life rarely reaches, if you recognized in Kale something you do not like to see in yourself or in the world around you, then you have already done the hardest thing. You listened without running away. But listening is not enough. And you know that. There is something inside that says, this cannot remain just beautiful words forgotten tomorrow. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, but for yourself. Because every time you choose content that makes you think instead of content that numbs you, you are planting a seed against the cycle that has been destroying us for millennia. And in the comments, tell me your seed. What is the egoless gesture you can make starting today? It can be small. Seeds are always small, because when you share an intention with others, it stops being just a thought and begins to become a commitment. And commitments, unlike empires, survive time.